Hello, I'm Debbie Abbott, and I am the publisher and editor of Dharma Direction on Substack. We publish a monthly e-zine with 4 editions that revolve around the zodiac. And in one of those editions, always our romance edition, we feature some poetry. And that's what we're here to talk about today with my Substack neighbor, Hattie Hayes. Hey, Hattie.
Neighbor. Hi, how are you?
So good to see you. Thanks for coming over.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, I just want, I love music. We love music, right? You and I love music. And I wanted to start this one with a little theme song here. All right, just a quick one.
And everything should have a theme song. Everything should have a theme song.
And I'm going to bring us back to that theme song at the end of our little chat here, and you'll see why. Probably won't be any surprise to you. But okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want you to, first of all, I want to let everybody know how we know each other. It's not completely random. My daughter introduced me to Hattie. Hattie used to live out here in Arizona. Now she lives in
New York City, greatest city in the world, baby.
My daughter was very much into theater and comedy and all that kind of stuff, which is how she met you. And it warms my heart, and it just like gives me the heebie-jeebies to think of somebody heading to New York on their own. I wanted you to tell me a little bit about what was the impetus for that move, and how did you do it by yourself?
Well, I'm originally from Missouri. I went to school in Arizona, and as a performer and writer, I always assumed that when I graduated from ASU, I would make that 6-ish hour drive to LA and wind up there. And my senior year of college, I pretty much skipped all my classes.
Didn't we all?
Yeah, because I was doing a bunch of comedy festivals. So I was traveling a ton and doing lots of shows all over the country. And one of those was a festival in New York City, which I had never been to before.
Oh.
And I think it was the third night of being in New York that I was walking around and I had to just sit down on a stoop and cry because I wanted to live here so badly. And I had never been someone who grew up thinking, I'm going to move to the big city. She says in her overalls. I had never thought, like, I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to be a New Yorker. It was never, I never had that sense of kind of movie magic until I actually came here. And it was just an immediate connection. And so I basically saved up, sold all my furniture. The moment I got back to New York, or the moment I got back to Arizona after that trip, I started planning and started applying for jobs and started ideating. And when I graduated, I packed up, sold all my furniture, and then shipped what I had out here, brought my cat. We flew into JFK, and that was that. I actually am coming up. This interview, I think, will come out just a few days before my 6-year anniversary, August 21st.
I was just going to ask, how long have you been there? Wow. Great. Well, you've made it. I mean, you've lasted 6 years. That's awesome.
Yeah. And they say, if you can make it here, anywhere. So if I ever wanted to leave New York, it's good to know I could make it anywhere, but I don't really want to.
I love New York. I really do. I've been there, I don't know, less than half a dozen, maybe 5 times. And every time I go, it's like, well, maybe I could live here. Because I always think, no, I couldn't live here. And then I go, well, maybe I could live here. There's so much to do and see. And I just love that about the city, or even, the outlying areas. You're still close enough to take advantage.
And there's so much to see and do in the city. You're always running into new and exciting opportunities. But the East Coast really is just so close together. All these little tiny adventures you can go on. I've gone to a number of different neighboring states. I was in Boston a couple months ago, and it was a really fun time. And growing up in the Midwest, driving 4 hours and going through 4 states is not a thing.
No.
So that's a really big change for me, but it's been a lot of fun to explore.
That is what's very cool about that area is the proximity of things. People will be like, I have friends there and they'll be like, oh, we're going to, like Vermont or Virginia or something. I think to myself, oh my God, that must going to take days. And then she's like, no, it's like, 3 hours or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so cool. Yay. Thank you for sharing that. I want to obviously talk about poetry. That's why we're here. But before we dive into that, I first want to touch lightly on your Substack post because, everybody who comes on to Substack kind of has their little niche and their things that they do. And what I've noticed about your Substack, aside from the poetry, which is a big part of it, is just the personable aspect of you and the little quirky things that I love so much. Obviously, your comedy, I love the way your twists of phrase and things are phenomenal, and your headings, your titles for your posts are so good. Coming from somebody in PR, it's so nice to see somebody who can really hit on what you're trying to say in so few words. Words to make you go, okay, I have to read this. So kudos to you for that. But your relationship with your mom, you have a really close relationship with your mom. My daughter and I, very, very close relationship. So tell me a little bit about that and maybe, some of the ways that she helped or influenced you.
I mean, really, a lot of the Substack that's just me is me kind of writing to my mom, and she and I very similar. It's not unusual for me to get called Jessie Junior. Because I look like her, I act like her, I laugh at the same goofy stuff as her. But I especially as I lean more into writing poetry and fiction. Uh, in my creative writing, I'm really not afraid to explore a lot of themes that are darker or sadder or just very raw. And I know that my mom will read those things, but I know that my mom loves to read about me being goofy and having fun. And she and I text all day long, all damn day. And we talk, and hang out fairly frequently. I get to go home a lot. But when I'm writing just kind of as myself, whether it's a personal essay or one of my blogier kind of Friday dispatches on my Substack, that really is in service to what would my mom want to read? What would make my mom laugh as she's catching up on her 1,300 emails in her inbox? My mom actually just got through like my whole Substack backlog because up until very recently, I'm going on kind of a summer break, but for the last several months, I've been publishing 4 times a week.
I noticed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how is she doing this?
That's a lot. And yeah, it's, I'm glad that I can get a text from my mom or my dad who both read all my posts and they'll be responding to something I said in a blog. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot I didn't tell you about that directly. I sent it to all of my subscribers. So it's kind of an ongoing conversation that the rest of the audience also gets to be a part of. Really, it's me and my parents.
Yeah, I kind of do a lot of the same thing when I'm writing my angel articles. I know that my mom is going to be the first person reading them. She'll text me, I just saw that your Dharma article came out and I'm just going to sit down in 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, Mom, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So it's nice to have that support of your family and also, to write something that they want to read and that is going to maybe warm their heart and make them feel good. I like doing that too. One of the other things I love about some of your Substacks are the things that you didn't buy.
So every week, for those uninitiated, in my Friday dispatch, I include a list of things I did not buy that week, and it's kind of it's a play on the kind of really commerce-y shopping posts that you get from a lot of other blogs. And it's about 50-50 of things I actually want but had discipline not to buy, and things I encountered that are ridiculous but I think everyone should know about. The most recent one I think was there's a glass and mirror artist who does these incredible giant, shiny, like life-size statues of the Virgin Mary that are covered in disco ball tiles.
Oh,
And man, if I had to spare $3,300, I would have one of those standing at the foot of my bed watching me sleep. And that's the kind of thing that makes it in. But also, I know a couple weeks ago, I posted about just an $8 moisturizer at the drugstore that I didn't buy because they wouldn't take my coupon, and I was mad. It was very much a little of both because I'm always bookmarking things like, am I going to buy this later? Am I going to come back for that? And a lot of the time, the answer is no. I will also say there are plenty of things I put in that newsletter that, 6 weeks or 6 months later, I go back and buy.
yeah.
Not the giant statues yet, but a lot of the other things.
I've seen some smaller things and I've thought, well, I might have bought that.
It also, here's a hot tip. I've also received a lot of gifts from friends and family because they've said, I saw this in your things I didn't buy, brother, so I bought it for you. I'm like, wow, that wasn't even what I was planning, but that's great.
I've always been a fan of reverse psychology. It seems to be working well.
I didn't buy it, but if someone wanted to buy it.
I love it. I love it. And then the last thing before we move into poetry that I want to talk about is our mutual love of karaoke. So when Tia and when she was about 13, starting at about the age of 13, when I could take her into one of these restaurant slash bar places that would let her stay and do karaoke with me after 9 o'clock. That came to be our mom and daughter activity. Every Sunday we would go out to karaoke, and it was so fun. Now, I was married to a jerk at the time, so it was kind of an escape for us to get away from him. But it's funny how good things come out of bad, right? We were trying to get away from a negative situation and we turned it into something positive. And it was at a country bar, so there were always plenty of cowboys who loved to dance, and we'd just be twirling around and dancing and singing. And it was probably the most fun, at least in my mind, that she and I have ever had together. And we still love to sing together in the car. We had a karaoke party for her 41st birthday. It just doesn't stop. So tell me about your love of karaoke.
Well, I love that you and Tia do karaoke together. My little brother, he is definitely a little more introverted than I am, but one of his side gigs is he does the AV setup and teardown for karaoke night in our hometown once a week on Saturday nights. And he is not a karaoke person. My parents also not really karaoke people. However, my family, who loves me so very much, has no problem with all going to the karaoke night where my brother, mind you, is working, for me to go and just make a show, make a scene of myself.
Uh-huh.
They will gladly cheer me on, and I can normally bully at least one of them into doing a song with me. Although they're both, my parents are both like, no. I will sometimes do songs that I know my brother likes, and then he never can listen to them again. But I love karaoke unabashedly. My book launch party was actually a karaoke party. So
fun.
it really has infiltrated all aspects of my life.
How fun. Music has always been such a huge comfort for me in my life. Growing up as an only child until I was 9, I resorted to music when I was, a latchkey kid more than watching TV. And my parents always listened to music more than they watched TV. My parents took me to my first concert, which was Elvis Presley in 1977. So the bar was like set, right? So music is huge, and that kind of harkens to the whole poetry aspect. And when I was a teenager, that's poetry was what was my coping mechanism. That's how I got through all of the teenage tragedies that we go through, because I could never talk to anybody. It's weird. I don't know if you have this or not, but even though I'm a writer, I have a really hard time talking with people about things that are really, really important to me, or, if I'm expressing my creativity, whether it be through poetry or photography or painting, whatever it is, writing. You get that weird feeling like you're giving your naked baby to somebody. It's just like it doesn't feel right sometimes. Um, so that's where I started with my love of poetry. And I never really read much poetry until just recently. And I have you to thank for a lot of that, because you and your poetry lessons kind of got me loosened up about sharing my poetry and going, okay, maybe I don't know all the forms and everything, but that's okay. I have something to say. Now I'm inspired to learn the forms. So I want to hear from you, when you started writing poetry, and what was your inspiration that made this such a huge part of your life?
So just first of all, that is the best news. Like going, because that is truly the entire impetus behind the newsletter. Is I want people to feel loosened up. I want people to feel like they are allowed to have a relationship with poetry. And I think it's something that, I wasn't nearly as vocal about my love for both writing and reading poetry for a long time. But I remember it was third grade, and we had a unit on poetry, in our creative writing aspect of our class.
Of third grade.
Third grade. The third grade level of creative writing is sometimes just writing with crayons. But other times it is, exploring a little bit more with craft and form. And I remember being in third grade, and the thing that made it all kind of click in my brain was a unit on limericks. I think it was approaching St. Patrick's Day, because of course. And I remember just having this intrinsic kind of brain tingle when I got the meter and the rhyme just right. I felt it just kind of light up.
You're giving me goosebumps now, girl.
I had the goosebumps, and I remember just, I kind of just felt then like, this is what my brain is wired for. This is what, like, it felt right. It lit up all the right neural pathways. So, I kept writing and reading a lot of poetry. At that age, I was reading a lot of Jack Prelutsky and slowly worked my way up to Rita Dove, and continued reading and writing all throughout high school. And then in college, a woman who would become one of my best friends, I kind of got interested in the slam poetry scene in Arizona, because I didn't have that growing up. And a woman who would become one of my best friends learned that I was hosting this poetry slam. I wasn't performing poetry on it. I was just hosting it because I like to be on stage. And she kind of just messaged me out of the blue. We hadn't known each other very much. She was like, "You write poetry? You like poetry? Do you write poetry? Okay, come with me." And she invited me to this, writing club. And she made me bring my diary, and she's like, "Read me a poem." I never read a poem out loud to someone. And my friend Molly, made me, and she was like, "Okay." And I mean, that was really it. That was kind of the thing that, she kind of kicked that door open for me. She's done that in a lot of ways for me throughout our life together. Molly has kicked a lot of my internal doors down. And it was only really in the last several years that I've started seeing my own poetry as something that is worthy to others. Like, it always had value to me.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
I knew that. And it wasn't necessarily, a lack of confidence. It was simply a lack of imagination that made me think my poetry was for me and only me. And I really started focusing in on publishing it and read in the last 3 years. And that's really, I think it's helped me understand myself a lot better, because I now have other people's understanding of me kind of at the back of my mind. Just a real quick anecdote. Several months ago, I received a message on Facebook from a woman who I did not know, did not recognize the name. And I think I did a total of fewer than 5 poetry slams that I actually performed in, where I actually read my own poems when I lived in Arizona. So, that's 1.25 a year. But this woman messaged me on Facebook, and she's like, "Hi, I don't know if you remember me at all, I saw you read a poem at a poetry slam in, early 2015. And I have thought about it ever since. And I
Oh my
wondered, and I hadn't thought of that poem since 2015. But she was like, I wondered if you could send it to me because I've thought about it a million times and I finally tracked you down.
God.
And that was such a one off, me just like trying something for the hell of it, instance. And it helped this person, this stranger, in some way. And it seemed like a call to kind of keep doing what I'm doing. So,
Well, the fact that it stayed with her, for so long.
yeah, and it was something that it didn't stay with me. It stayed with her. And I think that a lot of times when we feel embarrassed of our work or we don't feel a connection to our work, we don't realize it's because it's not for us, it's for somebody else. So you just gotta keep making it.
That reminds me, I heard a saying one time many years ago. I think maybe before, when I was transitioning from writing for magazines to like trying to write for myself. That when you're given a gift like the ability to create poetry or use language in a beautiful way or paint pictures or take beautiful photos, whatever your comedy gift, whatever it is, when you come to this earth with those gifts, if you do not share them, you're not only doing a disservice to yourself and your own soul and what it came here for, but you're doing a disservice to whoever created us and to all the people who were supposed to benefit from getting that experience. So that was a big kind of aha moment for me, and I was like, oh, okay, all right, maybe I can do this thing then. I want to talk about some of the poems that you have contributed to Dharma Direction in our fantasy romance edition. And I figure, poetry and romance go together no matter what the poem's about, right? Because romance is all over the place.
It's a romantic view of the world.
Exactly. The first one that we'll do, I'm going to go backwards from the farthest one to the most recent one. Back in the Sagittarius issue for 2022, you had one called My Favorite Moth. And I loved this one so much. And the last two lines of that poem really hit me. And it says, I've been having trouble sleeping. I think I miss being lonely. And to me, even now, it kind of like my heart goes when I say that, because it just resonates so bad with me, because I find myself missing lonely all the time. So I'm just curious, tell me about that a little bit.
The title actually comes from a typo.
A typo?
Typo. It was supposed to be my favorite month. When I had written down the idea, I've written, I keep a running document that is just little, I call it drips and drabs. And it's literally 2 to 5 word phrases that I think would work in a poem. And I had tried one day, middle of running errands, I tried to type my favorite month. And I typed my favorite moth. And I went, it's staying. And the poem really has a lot of insect imagery, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
I love.
Me too.
And anyone who reads that poem will see, the favorite moth thing really does come into play. But it that kind of being surrounded by insects speaks to that feeling of never really being alone, never really having time that's solely yours. Or when you do have that time that's just yours, wanting to share it with these small, quiet creatures who also want to be left alone. And I'm very lucky to have a wonderful group of friends and family who love and support my writing. And also sometimes I just have to be like, goodbye, I'm locking myself away. And they're all very understanding, but this does speak to that, just like that need of like, I'm going to shut myself in my room and I'm going to shut the door and I'm going to shut off my phone. I'm going to close the windows and I'm not going to answer. And if anyone is scared, they can just come get me because I need to be alone and I need to be writing. It's just,
when I was a teenager, Danielle Steele, who I think is, I don't even know how many books she's written, but I loved her. And I had read an article about her method of getting her work done. And it was very much like that, locking herself in a room. She would do it for 3 months at a time, though. And nobody was allowed to bother her. They would leave her food outside the door. And, she would, and I thought that sounded like heaven.
If I had my druthers, I would go 1 month of doing things, 1 month of not doing things, and just alternate. And then I would get 6 months of just pure work and reading, and then I would get 6 months of having fun. Not that work isn't fun, but that is my dream setup. So
I really like that setup. I think it's called retirement.
yeah, that's what I want. If anyone has hot tips on how to retire before 30, please email me.
I think you have to start saving, like when you're.
Never mind.
Yeah, I know. That's what my husband says to me. And I'm like, well, that boat sailed.
No.
I was too busy being a mama. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about was in our most recent Gemini edition, and that was called The One with All the Answers. And I think it was about in the middle of that poem. There's a bit that says, if I were you, and I once was, I would attune myself to the needs of the person you're trying to be. I love that. So explain yourself on that one.
Man, those two lines are so loaded with connotation, like for me, because this whole poem, but especially like that section that you're quoting from, really does come from times in the last couple of years, especially when my friends have called me wanting advice. And I mean, the best thing I can tell anyone is that, don't try to live up to others' expectations of yourself, and don't try to live up to your expectations of yourself, because expectations always either fall flat or you're dissatisfied anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But the only person you really owe anything to is the version of yourself you want to become. That's the only one you can work towards. And if you don't actively, mindfully work towards it, that person never exists. There's a quote that I heard probably a decade ago that has stayed with me and really guided a lot of my troubled times is, there's no perfect version of you waiting in the future. And there's never that person doesn't exist. And I think we all try to go find our way to meet this perfect version of ourselves who's out there somewhere if we just do the right things. And that's not a real person. It's not a thing. That's not a person. And you shouldn't be doing everything to have a meet cute with someone who doesn't exist.
I wish somebody would have given me that advice about 30 years ago, because I feel like I spent so much of my life doing exactly that, trying to be this perfect version, not only of the person I wanted to be, but the person I thought everybody else wanted me to be. So, I'm a big believer in the messages that we receive in dreams. And I have a dream journal that I keep. It's all logged. I refer back to dates, and you can see patterns of how things, messages come to you and stuff. So I had a dream many years ago that is still as vivid today as it was back then. And it was the weirdest thing, because I met myself in the dream. And the circumstances was, I was standing up on this hill, and there was a man who I believe was Archangel Michael, was pointing down the hill, and he said, "You see that bike over there leaning against the tree? I want you to go steal that bike." And I was like, I don't steal. I'm not going to go steal that bike. And he's like, "No, you are. I need you to go steal that bike. Just trust me and go steal that bike." So I went and I stole the bike. And as I'm trying to get away with the bike, the girl who owns the bike starts chasing after me. And I end up, getting jammed into a corner somewhere, somehow, and I can't get away. And I turn around to look at her, and it's me. And I said, "My name is Debbie. What's your name?" And she's like, "I'm Debbie too." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." I said, I'm so sorry I stole your bike." And she's like, "Oh, that's okay." And she just took it and went off. And that was the end of the dream. And I really felt like that was the angels telling me, you are who you are. So, and let's talk about another poem. Wrestle with Jimmy was in our latest Cancer edition, and I had to ask, what does this mean? Because there was no reference to Jimmy, and I'm like, there's something I'm not getting. I just know it. But before you tell me about that, I want to tell you my favorite line, and that's the very first one, the very first set of lines, because I think I know what it means, but I literally have no idea what it means, and it's just so obtuse that I'm like, what? It says, "My worth is hamburger, hot and understood on sight." So please tell me about that.
Okay, so first, I know I mentioned earlier that when I karaoke in front of my brother, I like to choose some of his favorite songs and ruin them. And my brother's a huge Weezer fan, and the song "Say It Ain't So" has a line that is "Wrestle with Jimmy." And one of my favorite ways to ruin that song is after that line comes up in the song, and then only sing "Wrestle with Jimmy, wrestle with Jimmy," and those are the only words. Which is it's like a thing that I've infected my friend group with. My boyfriend does it at karaoke now. It's great. And so this is kind of this poem is really digs deeply into just like my sense of commodification as a woman, and especially in a male dominated space such as the band Weezer. It's inspired by a very late night casino experience where I was not very good at blackjack and was very hungry, so I was like, hey, everyone, give me money and I'll go get us food. So I wound up taking a somewhat frightening Uber ride to a local hamburgery. And,
Is that a thing?
It is now. Obtaining roughly, a dozen burgers and orders of fries and bringing them back with, again, the same lecherous Uber driver. And I was dressed in like a very fancy get up because I'd been to an event earlier in the evening, and just like this overwhelming sense of like commodification of my body and my personality, and the fact that like, oh, she's a girl but she knows this song, like all of that kind of played into it. And so I very much felt like a hamburger, because when you see a hamburger and it is wrapped in its fancy little wax paper, it's there and hot, ready, and delicious, which is how I felt. And it wasn't necessarily a negative experience, but it is one I've had enough times that I wonder if the fact that I, wasn't afraid is just because I was numb to it, or I was like, I've gotten out of worse scraps than these. But it was, it's just a very a very sensory experience to being observed, especially when you're, in a floor-length gown carrying a dozen hamburgers to a casino. You're very observed. You're very seen, and people are looking at you, but you're not necessarily being seen.
Yeah.
And
well, it's kind of like that being a woman, right? Most of the time, being a woman can be like that.
Yes, it can.
Yeah, I think I've been around that block a few times, but
we should own property on that block. Being in the comedy world as a woman really opened me up to new depths of how men exist. I will never forget, I recorded a really fun podcast with a comedian who I liked, who had never been weird towards me at all. And we had a great conversation. And then when I listened to it, when it was published, he recorded the intro after he and I recorded. And I'll never forget that he said, she's smart, she's hilarious, and best of all, she's pretty. And I was just like, oh, it sucks when it's a surprise. And especially on a podcast, I'm like, I guess thanks for telling them I'm pretty since they can't see me, bud. But
yeah, awkward. Well, I won't mention anything about the way you look.
Thank you.
But to get on to somebody else who I love, and I love the way she looks, is Regina Spektor, which, I fell in love with Regina way back when. And I think my favorite song still remains Fidelity, because it just spoke to me so much, especially when she talks about how it breaks her heart, to have all of these voices and these words and this music in her head with one foot in this place and one foot over here, and not being able to commit or love fully. And it spoke to me so very much that I've never been able to let go of that as my favorite song. Although I do love the new song Sugar Man.
I love that one.
Oh my gosh. And I'm curious if there was any influence or inspiration from Toni Morrison's book. Oh God, which one? I can't believe I can't think of the name of it. Hold on, which one is it? Song of Solomon. Duh, Song of Solomon. Because there's that Sugar Man song.
Yes.
That they like the whole thread through the whole thing.
It has to be, yeah.
So if you ever meet her, ask her for me. But
so I'm going to see her at Summer Stage here in New York later this month. So I'll see what I can do.
Now, does she do some little meet and greets afterwards? Do you hang around for that kind of stuff?
I actually, the first time I ever saw her in concert, which was right when I moved to New York, I did stay out in a freezing cold parking lot in New Jersey to meet her. And it was just a very quick, like, hi, I just moved here, and the first thing I spent a paycheck on was tickets to the show, and I've wanted to see you forever, and you just never were around where I was, so thank you. And she hugged me, and she smelled like Swedish fish in New York, and she was very sweet. And I've never hung around since. Summer Stage, I think I can get pretty close up. Last time I went to a Summer Stage show, I got to go backstage after, and I had a friend who was friends with the performer. So maybe it might happen. We'll see. I might just be like, excuse me, hi, please.
Can I just chat with you for a minute? Can we just get a coffee or something? That's always what I'm like. If I could just grab a coffee with some of my favorite singers, that to me would be that's my bucket list, is not have to wait out in line at midnight after a concert for an hour and a half for them to come out while I'm holding my pee. I have to go so bad.
Oh yes. Well, and a cool thing, truly, one of my life goals I achieved last year. I had published on it's a literary journal that has a sub blog, Meow Meow Pow Pow, and they have the Pup Pup blog, which I highly recommend everyone check out. But they published a long essay I wrote about Regina Spektor, and she read it and she retweeted it, and the fact that she has read my writing is really a life goal achieved for me. I'm like, she's got what she needs. I've got what I need.
I remember reading that and thinking that, yes, I feel like that if some of the people I love, if they were to read anything of mine, that would be like, okay, maybe I'm done.
Yeah. And that's, what, I would love to get a copy of my book in her hands and just be like, hey, you don't even need to give me a review. I just want you to know that I couldn't have done it without you, because she has been a tremendous influence on my writing style.
And I'm curious and I mean, I can guess, but how do you relate to her? How is it that you relate to her?
There's, I think, a kind of magical lyrical experience of the world that a lot of people give up or suppress very early on, or they become ashamed of it in some way. As a white woman with bangs, I clearly am no stranger to whimsy. But I think that Regina Spektor really embraces that kind of willing mysticism and kind of just fervent eagerness in a way that really resonates with me. She finds this kind of beauty, and not a tragic beauty necessarily, but just a beauty in very small experiences that I think is true of all of my favorite writers. And she just marries that sort of lyricism with musicality in a way that nobody else does to me.
And
it's singular. It's so singular. It's so uniquely her, unique to her experience and her background and her classical music training, and the fact that she's a lifelong New Yorker. It's that same brain tingle when I'm writing something and I know I got it just right. Is I hear something she's written and I'm like, she got it just right. And, I think everybody has a handful of artists who are like that for them. And she's at the top of my list.
Yeah, I love her so much. I'm also a huge fan of Tori Amos,
Mm-hmm.
who has a lot of those similarities in her music. And, one time my husband said to me when I was listening to Tori, he said, her music is so sad. And it was so funny because I felt sad for him in that moment because I was like, oh, you don't get it.
I had a
You don't get it, babe.
I had a nearly exactly one-to-one experience with an ex-boyfriend and Regina Spektor. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry that you don't have this depth of feeling in this way. Like,
right. That's kind of how I felt. But my husband's a Libra, so I give him grief all the time about him being the only zodiac with no heartbeat.
excuse me, I hope you know I am a Libra.
No, I did. Well, that speaks to why you're so balanced and why I do like you so much, because Libras really are the best. They're the easiest people to get along with.
It's not our fault.
No.
It's not our fault. And we understand why people give us so much grief.
Yeah.
Well,
We're just jealous of you.
it is a burden to bear. And yet, here I am being so strong.
So strong. God bless you. So the last thing that I wanted to, well, actually the last thing before the final thing to come back to the intro theme, is I wanted you to talk just a little bit about your book, what's going on, with that. I know something you published very recently, right?
Yeah, so I just released my first poetry book, which is called Poems for, About, Because, My Friends. And like the title says, it's largely a book about friendship. Those friends who won't stop bugging me and making me hang out with them and keeping me from my writing. It's about them, and it's really had a great reception. Everyone has been so wonderful, and I love how many people have reached out to me with questions or comments about specific poems. It's been just a wonderful, illuminating experience that makes me want to keep writing. And I think I'm sold out of my signed copies, but you can still get some copies from the publisher, which is Bullshit Literary, and I'll make sure that you have a link to that, Debbie. But truly could not have asked for a better first book experience.
So this was your first, your debut was this poetry book. How many poems are in it?
There are 28 poems. It is 50 pages. It's also interspersed in between the poems are sections of a long prose piece that I'd written a few years ago that I didn't do anything with. That was all about, it was titled at the time, An Oral History of All My Friends. And it was just writing about every friendship I can remember ever having. And it was an impossibly long document that I would just felt the need to catalog. I think I wrote it in 2020 when I was very isolated from a lot of people. And I have sections of that interspersed throughout the book, alongside poems about those people. So it's, a really kind of juxtaposing the poem itself, which everyone might relate to the experience I've had with one specific person or with a group of people.
Wow. Man, I'd be tearing through that looking for my page. What'd she say about me?
I did at my launch party. I had a couple of people who were like, am I in this? I'm like, I circled. I'm like, you're on page 14. You're on page 26. So I did do that for a couple of friends. I'm like, here.
Oh my gosh.
The word search.
That's so fun. That's awesome. I love it. And then, so your Substack that you're doing, I'm so happy to be on Substack. I'm really enjoying it. I can't believe we're coming up this, in another couple months as 1 year on Substack. I'm like, whoa. How are you liking it?
I love my Substack. I truly, I like I said, I'm going on kind of a mini hiatus right now because I'm working on finishing a draft of my novel. But I looked at my stats and I realized I started this in November and I've published 138 posts. And I cannot believe I've kept with it that long. I can't believe I did that. It's really been such a fun area for experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
I had last year, I was getting ready to go away for my first writing residency. And one of the ways I raised money is I taught some poetry workshops that were called poetry for cowards. Literally, like, are you scared of poetry? Well, guess what? We're going to write some poems today. And that was the framework that kind of became my poetry prompts in the newsletter. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to kick open that door for people and say, yes, this is scary. I'm also scared. We're going to do it together. It's going to be fine. We can survive poetry. I have had so many people say, you know what, I'm writing again, or I'm writing for the first time. And that's what I wanted. But it's also because I think, the key to this is I've infused it with a lot of my, it's not all didactic, right? I've infused it with my personality and with some personal essays and other writing I've done. And I think that's kind of key to making it work. Um, like I said, I'm on this kind of little hiatus right now while I get my novel into shape. But throughout September, I'm going to be updating my paid subscribers on my novel progress, so they'll get to know, like, I'm really stuck on this one character, or wow, this chapter used to suck and now it sucks less. So once I return from the hiatus, I'm also going to be introducing some new features. I'm working on an advice column, which that earlier, it's all writing advice, but that the one with all the answers definitely inspired it. A beauty, like a specific like beauty writing column, as well as interspersing some more of my own short fiction throughout. So
wow.
Like now, honestly, now is a great time to sign up for the newsletter because you can work your way through the massive archive. And by the time you get caught up to my mom, by the time you get caught up to both my parents, there will be new things for you to read. So now is the time if you want to subscribe.
We'll be sure to drop the link in here for that, for your page. Absolutely. And, I want to circle back to saying how much your poetry exercises that you do have helped me. And I have news. I have some news, and this is the first time I'm sharing it. So I've never entered any kind of poetry competition or anything like that. Never even thought about it until I started doing those exercises of yours. And I'm like, well, maybe I can do this. And so I started looking at different contests here and there. And I entered a poem that I wrote, that what I did was, and again, it wasn't necessarily one of the exercises that you did, but it was because of the way you showed us how to pull this, kind of out and make these beautiful words and poems out of things that maybe you didn't expect, or that really isn't as difficult as you think it is. I guess life is more beautiful and easy to see sometimes, from a poetic standpoint. But anyway, so I wrote a poem called Crumbs that was just a short poem, only 16 lines, but it was a specific poetic form. I wanted to show that I knew a poetic form, and I entered that, and I did get an honorable mention.
Yay! Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you.
Yeah.
I'm excited that you wrote a poem. I'm excited that you submitted it. And I'm also excited that you got an honorable mention. But like the fact that you were recognized is subsidiary to me of you recognizing, like, oh yeah, I should be doing this. Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, I've had friends for years and years, just a couple, who I've shared my poems with, who are like, why aren't you, doing this for real? And it's like, well, it's just kind of been this coping mechanism, personal thing for me. So I haven't. But now that I'm like you, working on a novel, I have a different mindset about sharing my work. So real quickly, before we wrap up with our theme song, tell me about your novel.
So my novel in progress is, it's kind of it's so hard to describe. It's kind of a literary fantasy novel. And it's about two women who were childhood best friends. And over the course, the strength of their friendship becomes the basis for psychic powers. They have a literal psychic connection, a shared plane of existence.
I love it already. Send me a copy.
Yeah. And as they grow older and they grow apart, they go from having this real life friendship to having this kind of what our friendship could have been. This sort of friendship in the subjunctive tense is how I try to kind of think
Wow.
of it. And it's a book that's largely about the grammar of their friendship and kind of what happens when they still love each other but no longer understand each other, and how that all kind of falls apart around them. So it is, yeah, it's something that I have a first draft that's done, and I've been slogging through my revisions, but it is coming along. So I am focusing. I'm going to be deeply in that, for the next several weeks, and expect some weird poems. I always write weirder poems when I'm writing the novel. When I'm like really working hard on the novel, my poetry gets weird. Get ready, everyone. Get ready, Debbie.
You got to channel that somewhere, But I
But
think that's something in all of the books that I've ever read, all of the authors I've ever loved. Something that I've gravitated to was the poetic essence of their, of the language and the words they use. So to me, poetry is intrinsic to being a good writer, no matter what your writing is, no matter what kind of novel you're writing, I feel. So now we circle back and to when I said I love the titles that you come up with. You had a post recently. It was called Mama Toe No.5.
yep.
And I haven't been able to get this song out of my head since then.
I have a playlist on my phone that is Hattie's happy songs, and it's only it's like 5 songs long, and Mambo No.5 is one of them. And my mom is saved in my phone as Mambo No.5. So, yep, I apologize for what I have wreaked upon you.
I thought it was hilarious, not just because it was so clever, but because there's a good chance that you and I had that accident with our pinky toes right around the same time. Because when I was helping Tia move, I ran over my pinky toe with like this big 3-wheel razor scooter thing. And I heard it crunch, and it was just like yours. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I got the Mama Toe No.5 right here. So we'll keep doing what you're doing. I love it. You're doing awesome. You're such an inspiration to me. And like I said, thank you for helping me come out of my poetry posy shell. And I look forward to seeing what you got coming up and seeing your book.
No, I'm excited. And thank you so much for giving me a platform both here today and on the Dharma Direction newsletter. And hey, listen, like I said, my poems are going to get weirder. So I hope you're ready for when you say, hey, Hattie, do you have any poems for this upcoming issue? And I'm like, Debbie's are weird. Debbie's are weird. I hope you're ready.
I love weird. I love weird. The only thing I don't like is gross, like ick, but I wouldn't expect that from you anyway. So
as long as I don't break any more toes.
yeah. The loose teeth inside description, I was like, oh, but it's so good because you just know what that Mama Toe No.5 feels like. All right, my dear. Thank you so very much. We'll talk to you soon.